Good afternoon. My name is Cecile Eskenazi, and because I work in VR, I'm always asking people what they dream of doing with it. I hear a whole variety of answers. Jessica wants to go to church in VR. Emily wants to learn how to decorate a cake. And Sally hopes that one day she can hike the Grand Canyon with her son while still in her wheelchair. As a product manager on the social VR team at Facebook, my work is to help them achieve this new possibility. So in the next few minutes, we will explore use cases for social VR outside of gaming. How many of you here are not gamers? There's a few. I too, I'm not a gamer. We love VR too, right? And we are some of the people who are pushing to expand our vision for connecting people with each other in VR. What excites me about VR goes beyond games. It's the deeper connection we can feel in VR with our friends, family, or even the people we just met. Being in VR with someone else and feeling that sense of presence can be truly magical. But just being there is not enough. People need things to do together to prompt social interactions. I am passionate about uncovering the types of activities that people are excited to do together in VR. But we have a perception problem with VR today. Here are a few things we hear over and over again from people, particularly women, before they try VR. A lot of people think that VR is not for them because they think it's only for gamers and for gaming. And that includes people who play a lot of games but don't identify as gamers. Here is what they say after trying VR. How can we get more people to realize that VR is for them too? At Facebook, we believe deeply in the power of VR to connect people, and we envision a future where VR is for everyone. If we want to appeal to a broader audience, we need to show the full potential of VR by introducing people to experiences beyond games. So then, how do we go about defining those use cases? VR is still in its infancy, and there are not a lot of proof in the market for what people want to do together in VR. That's why we are very interested in exploring and experimenting. The way we approach this process is by doing three things. First, we collect market insights and run user research to help us understand the motivations of people interested in VR. We also take a deep look at people who are not interested in buying or even just trying VR and dig into their barriers to adoption. Second, we listen to the community. For example, we read every single post on the Spaces community group on Facebook. Many people like to share their favorite features or what they'd love for us to develop in the future. We are very grateful for that feedback. Please, keep it coming. And third, we build many prototypes. We try them out, iterate on them, or throw them away. We have invested in a stable technical infrastructure for that very purpose. It's important to note that we don't design activities, for example, for men or for women. We design for everyone. Our focus is on finding the fun. We want activities that people want to come back to, that makes them feel engaged, and get that unique sense of connection that only VR can bring. Once we have found that compelling concept, we make sure to build an activity that is accessible to all, men, women, and particularly people who are new to VR. By now, you may be wondering what those use cases are. From our research, we hear some early signals that certain use cases resonate with a broad audience, like traveling the world from the comfort of their home, watching movies together, or learning new skills. Here are a few more ideas from a recent focus group we ran with women who were just discovering the potential that VR had for them. They want to travel and explore. For example, jumping from a helicopter or virtually ticking things off their bucket lists. They want to learn new languages, how to dance, or even how to do a job. They want to build their communities by attending Bible study with friends or connecting with remote family members. They want group activities like exercise and meditation classes or concerts. They want to up their game in beauty and fashion by experimenting with a new hairstyle or going shopping virtually. And they also want to be more productive by using collaboration and design tools. There are many opportunities that VR can bring into their lives. From the community, we've gathered amazing insights on how people like to use our existing products. Here are a few examples of popular uses of Facebook Spaces. The first use case I want to highlight is content creation and broadcasting. We have seen a wide array of people creating novel content in Spaces and going live to share it with the world. For example, Eva Leon and Ceciliana Trevino, they're here somewhere in the audience. They host a weekly live stream called Feature Friday from Spaces into the AR/VR Women and Allies group they lead. This Facebook group has close to 5,000 members. Every Friday afternoon, they hold a fun and informative live where they provide updates to their community and interview VR influencers. Check it out. Mike Mirabal is a Spaces user that is also a creative visual storyteller. He blew us away when he put himself in a crystal ball. He also created this fun 360-degree music video using Spaces. He regularly goes live from VR to share how he is experimenting with the platform. The second use case I want to talk about is VR journalism. Here we can see Ivan Lahara, a former student at the University of Southern California, who now works for a paper in upstate New York. He decided that Spaces would be the perfect medium for sharing news and started to create a series of news videos and share his personal best practice around this emerging medium. He typically uses a combination of both 360 and 2D photos and videos to support his narrative. Here is another example of VR journalism. Yusuf Omar is a former CNN social media reporter. As a Spaces power user, he also sees VR as a new and important way for journalists to share stories. For example, he did this incredible live stream on Nelson Mandela for what would have been his 100th birthday. The third and last use case I want to cover today is meetups and hangouts. We have seen people come together in VR for either formal meetups or more informal hangouts, usually around shared interests. Oculus for Languages is a language immersion group created by university teacher Borja Herrera. He hosts regular Spanish conversation meetups in Spaces where people can converse with each other from wherever they are. This picture was taken at a spontaneous hangout in the Oculus Virtual Reality community group. Joshua, pictured here on the right, is another product manager on the team. He saw a couple of people go live from Spaces to that group and decided to join them. He stuck around for several hours and had a pretty fun time interacting with other VR enthusiasts. That's a great example of people getting together in VR around communities and shared interests. We've covered many examples of use cases from our research as well as from the community. It's still early days, but it's encouraging to see early signals that people want to use VR for meaningful interactions. I want to leave you with one thought. To succeed as an industry, we need to bring in different audiences to experience VR. What we build in VR is only limited by our imaginations. The more we start building these new experiences, the more we expand the possibilities to drive social interactions in VR. That's how we will break the perception that VR is only for gamers. VR is for everyone. And now, I want to welcome Mike LeBeau to the stage to talk about another example of how we are building VR for everyone with one of our latest products, Oculus Venues.
All right. Thanks, Cecile. Good job. Hey, everybody. Great. I've got the clicker. Right. Here we go. So my name is Mike LeBeau. I am the product and site lead for the London office where we work on a bunch of VR things, including social experiences like Oculus Venues. And today I'd like to tell you a little bit about some of what we learned so far having built and shipped Venues. So if you're not familiar with Venues, this is a quick little video of example of what it looks like. It is a large, large-scale social experience product, right? So thousands of people get together for live events like concerts or sporting events or movie nights, things like that. And it's been a really interesting, fascinating learning experience. I've only got 15 minutes, so I'm going to run through a few really quick insights about things that we've learned since we launched that'll hopefully be helpful for you as you think about building your own social apps. The first is venue design. So this is an area where, as we thought about building venues, we went through a ton of different iterations on what the experience should look like. And it turned out it was actually really hard to sort of balance the content experience and the crowd and figure out a way that should feel right. So as you saw in the quick video, Venues is mostly 180 video. So it's immersive and it's very large screen. And then you have also this crowd that we're trying to sort of achieve two things simultaneously. One is the experience of being at the real world event that's streaming in, and also the feeling of being with a crowd of virtual avatars who are enjoying the experience with you and the vibrance that comes with that. So to do this, we studied all kinds of new areas. This is an early sketch of some stuff when we were working on proxemics, which is the study of human interpersonal distance and how do we make sure we're putting people at distances to each other that feel natural. So if you're sitting next to a stranger, it doesn't feel like they're too close to you or someone's too far away to have a natural conversation. Those kinds of things. We also played with just a ton of different examples of layouts and the ways that we could actually lay out the crowd and the content to make things work. You can see a bunch of crazy stuff here from an early design sketch from a while back. In the top right, you can see this whole crazy thing we were trying with an omnidirectional treadmill where you could like point anywhere and navigate, and if you kept going that direction long enough, you'd loop back on yourself. And we tried all these crazy cool things, lots of really fun stuff in here. But what we found was, even with 360 degrees, it's actually a big challenge to find enough real estate to accomplish both of the goals of the vibrance of the crowd and the immersion in the experience. And so we tried things like freeform cluster teleportation, where you could point at a group of people and say, I want to sit with them, and get automatically placed in the best position to talk to those people, but also still see the content. A bunch of really cool stuff. But what we found at the end of the day was the biggest challenge was actually figuring out how to make it understandable enough to users. All that cool stuff was really complicated. So here's an example of a model of one of those early prototypes. This was basically a large content screen like you see today in venues, but also a large navigation area where all the avatars would be placed sort of in a flat plane amongst each other, right? And this seemed like a natural place to start. We wanted a bunch of people to hang out, and we wanted to show something large. What it turned out was it was really hard to trade off between the content and the crowd. So if you are moving around this flat plane and you end up in in an area with a bunch of avatars, and then you go back out into the full screen mode where there's a navigation mode where you can kind of see all the avatars, suddenly some of those avatars are gone, and that's super confusing. And there's a bunch of just weird, hard problems that came with how people understood this experience, right? So we ran this through user research, and people came out and said, that was kind of cool, but I don't really know what I was doing exactly. So it turns out it's really, really hard to sort of invent something entirely new without some references to the real world. So it turns out that structure and references to the real world, this has come up time and again in all the projects we've built in our teams, are really important in designing experiences that people understand, right? So maybe that's sort of obvious, but you think it's VR, we can do anything, we can do all these amazing things, and a lot of times what we find is the things that are too ambitious end up just being not understandable, and we end up coming back to things that feel natural to people, right? So like a teapot, you know how to use a teapot because you've seen one, you know how it functions. The fact that it has a handle and a spout, you know what to do with those things, right? So that has been a theme of everything we've built. And so we quickly learned with venues that we wanted to build something that was a fairly structured experience, more than we'd originally thought, more than some of those crazy ideas I showed you a minute ago. So this is a little example. This is a seating diagram of 4 people that sit together in venues, a simple thing, but one of the things we learned early on is we wanted to encourage people to sit in groups of 4 and actually sort of socialize with a small group of people within the broader audience. And so what we did here, this is something we actually borrowed from our work on Oculus Rooms, which is another project we built in London, where we had people sitting around a TV and watching TV content together. Turns out having a totally flat line of people interacting to watch TV is a bad experience because it turns out it's hard to, I'll show you an example here. It's hard to, if you have that flat line and you're the guy here sitting kind of trying to look at the people next to you, you turn to your side and actually you have to crane your neck pretty far over to see the guy next to you, especially with the limited field of view of the headset and everything. It's not the most comfortable thing. Also, even worse, if you then want to look past that person to the other people in the row, that's hard to do because it's a 3 degrees of freedom device. So you can't do what you would do in the real world, which is just lean forward and talk to somebody, right? So we ended up instead with that curved cabaret seating arrangement, just a simple thing that goes a long way towards adding structure to the experience, helping people not have to think about how to interact. Then we realized that to get the most out of a 180-degree video, we wanted a lot of the vertical field of view to be visible, right? So whereas when we went in those early prototypes where we had the flat plane of avatars, you kind of had to hide avatars in front of you if you wanted to see enough of the content, and that sort of screwed with the social experience and made it confusing what you were looking at. So we then realized, hey, we should bank the seating, right? People that are in front of you should be lower than you, and people that are behind you should be higher than you, and that this made it easier to see more of the content and feel more immersed in the experience while still maintaining the vibrance of the crowd. And then we put these all together. We had these little pods of 4 in banked seating arrangements in sort of a curved arrangement around the venue. And lo and behold, you've basically built an amphitheater, right? So we probably should have realized this when we started. We tried a whole bunch of crazy stuff and then kind of came back to the basics. But we found that to my point, relying on real-world references is super valuable. And this is not only because they're familiar to people, right? Because this is something we can all look at and understand what that's for and where you might encounter that. But also because these things have undergone a lot of that iteration already, right? So this is an amphitheater from ancient Turkey, which goes back as far as 147 AD. Same idea. These guys had the clue that it took us a while to iterate to with all of our crazy technology. So in reality, though, you put people in this version of venues, and it was striking compared to the things we'd tested before. You put people in, and they go, yeah, no, I got it. This was amazing. I felt like I was at this large event. It was an amphitheater full of other people. There's no question about what the experience is at that point, which is great. So that's venue design. I'll also tell you a little bit about some of the audio stuff that we had to fight with in the experience. So we wanted to make it as realistic as possible, given that you can be in there with up to thousands of people. And one of the biggest innovations of venues has been the complex server that powers it. So a single shard in venues can actually handle up to hundreds of connections at a time, and it's scalable to any number of shards that we need to support the number of connections of people coming in the door. Oculus Connect 5 has actually been a great example. We've been streaming the event in venues, and we've had a really large number of people coming in with interest from outside the conference and people who couldn't make it to San Jose, which is really awesome, and we had to scale a lot of servers to support all those people. But audio is especially complicated with this because we can't have all the clients that are in there receiving all of the hundreds of other clients' audio and then having to somehow mix those on their own device. That would not be possible for a device like an Oculus Go, and it wouldn't be a great way to do this. So instead, we do cloud mixed audio, right? Every single user sends their audio up to the cloud, where the server then churns on that and sends back down a single ambisonic audio stream to a single person, representing what it should sound like from their position in the crowd, right? So ambisonics allows you to kind of send down a single stream and have a positionalized audio experience without having to send a bunch of audio down. But this also means the server needs to calculate a unique mixture for every single user in the venue, right? Which is also a very complex problem. Again, better done on the server than on the client. And so the server has to figure this out for every different position. And as people move around, it changes and all of that stuff, and then send down each of those to the different users. But what that allows for is that at the end of the day, when you're using your Oculus Go headset, you send up one stream of audio, which is your microphone, and you get back down one ambisonic stream of audio, which represents how it should sound to you. And this works. So we have moments where there's a live sports event where something exciting happens and people cheer, or a comedy night where people laugh, and you get to feel that ambiance in the crowd and feel like you're actually there, which is what we were going for. And if you remember those seating pods of 4 people each, well, we wanted to make sure that you could have the best experience with those users. So we bias the audio towards the users that you're closest to. And we tweaked the heck out of this to try to figure out the distance values that would make this feel natural. Again, adding structure to the experience so you kind of understand what you're supposed to be doing there. And so we make the people that you're sitting with very audible to you. They've got the best volume, obviously. But then we do a bunch of hand tweak values so that the people directly in front of you are people that, you can tell they're a little further away. You can still communicate with them directly if you want to, if they want to turn back and look at you, or if you want to turn back and look at the people behind you, that kind of thing. But then the people further than that, it's more of a kind of a fall off and muffled kind of experience, right? So you can still hear the vibrance of the crowd, but not feel like you're hearing 200 voices all at the same time. And even with all that, it's still a big crowd, and it can still be hard to figure out who's talking sometimes, because as it would be in a real-world crowd. So we do other little things that kind of help with that, like this visual cue where when someone is speaking, you can see these little wavelets come from their mouths, and you can tell, okay, it's that person, not the one right next to them if there are multiple people around, which there usually are. So that's the audio experience. Really interesting stuff we've learned there. I want to tell you a little bit about the social interaction. So we did a lot of work to make meaningful social connections happen in venues, right? This is our first product really to bring people together who don't know each other at all at large scale in VR. And so that's really exciting. We have a lot of opportunities to help people make interesting connections. But the types of interactions you have with people you don't know are very different from the types of interactions you have with people you do know. And so that's something we really thought a lot about when designing venues. And we've been thinking about this for a long time, even well before venues, and we think of social interactions on a spectrum between what we say is people-centric and activity-centric, right? So if you think of something like Oculus Rooms or Facebook Spaces, we consider those mostly people-centric experiences, right? Those are experiences that are heavily focused on the interaction you have with the other people, with the assumption that these are people that are meaningful to you in some way, people you care about, loved ones, friends, family, that kind of thing. And so the activities can be, fun, silly, fun, simple things, right? Like playing board game or watching TV together. Whereas when you're with a whole bunch of strangers, we think that is more of an activity-centric type of experience, so that's going to work better, right? So putting people around some sort of common activity where they can socialize, and that certainly adds a lot to the experience, but it's not the main reason they're there necessarily, right? And so we think of venues as an activity-centric product, obviously, and we build social features that try to cater to activity-centric social interactions. So one of the most interesting areas of sort of innovation for venues that we're really excited about continuing to look into is using Facebook to help you make more meaningful connections with the people that you meet at an event, at a venue's event. So we started by letting you choose to share mutual social context with people there, right? So if you opt in, then we will tell you when you have a mutual friend with someone you're sitting next to, or if you have you both like the same pages on Facebook or things like that. So we hear this all the time when we go in there. If you haven't been in venues, you should totally try it. It's fascinating to go in and overhear the connections that are happening when somebody goes, oh, yeah, that's somebody I went to college with, or oh, you like that band too, that's cool. Things like that are really happening, which is really exciting. I mentioned our server system and our shard distribution. So our shard distribution strategy and the seeding algorithm that takes all this into account, right? So when you first come into venues, it's not going to be a coincidence if you end up sitting next to somebody that has a mutual friend with you, because we actually take that into account in choosing where to seat you and which shard to put you in with the most people that seem interesting to you, that kind of thing. So fostering a lot of these connections, and there's a ton of cool stuff to try there. And by the way, this sharing is all opt-in, so if you're not interested in sharing anything about yourself, you don't have to. Something we make clear is upfront when you first enter the venue that that's something you can choose to share so that people feel in control of their experience. And speaking of feeling in control, actually, so the last area I want to talk about is safety. We did a lot of work to make sure that venues feel safe to people, and we know that social VR feels very real, right? It's surprisingly realistic to be with other people in VR, and so we take that seriously. We want to make sure that that's a positive and safe experience for people. So we built safety in from the very beginning, and we've done that in many levels, but here's just 4 I'll quickly run through. The first is that it's an activity-centric experience, right? I mentioned this before. We think this has a lot of benefits, one of which is it makes people focus on the activity. And so, the idea is let's make it more fun to enjoy the thing you're there to do than just to mess with the people next to you, right? This is a common issue. And so making sure that the activity is compelling is one of the things we do. Another, as I also mentioned, is the structured environment design, right? So the sense that you are in a structured position, you've got a specific seat, it's a 3 degrees of freedom device, so you can't get up and get in the face of the person next to you. That helps a lot as well. But also I think the fact that back to those real world references, the fact that this feels like a knowable space from the real world, I think helps kind of like reinforce some of those social norms from the real world. You feel like you're in a theater or an auditorium and you know what to do there. There's certain things you do and there's certain things you don't do. Also, we do Facebook login, right? So Facebook login is part of the venue's experience, and we think this helps, again, connect people back to the sense of the real world. So they come in knowing that even though they're not sharing their full identity, the system is tied to their identity, so it kind of reminds them, okay, I should probably behave like I would behave in the real world and not be a jerk. And so, those things help a lot. And then finally, even with all that, bad things will always happen. And so we also built a lot of tools that help the user mute, block, or report people. And these tools are the same ones that we offer to developers, so we're excited about the fact that venues is a place where we can learn from these experiences and then bring better experiences to developers over time. But the idea is, you can mute someone next to you if they're making too much noise or you find them annoying. You can block people if there's somebody you don't want to see on any Oculus property in the future. And if that even isn't enough, then you can actually report someone, and that will turn into a report that gets reviewed by someone, and we can decide whether that's somebody that should be removed from the experience. So those are the 4 areas of quick insights about what we've done. If you do want to read more, I've got very little time up here, but Wired did a fun article when we launched that goes into a little bit more depth on some of this stuff, so you can search for that. And just lots of interesting stuff that this is only a tiny slice of the things we've learned. And by the way, we've been really excited to use Oculus Connect as a place to explore even more of this exciting stuff with venues this year. So as I mentioned, we've been streaming venues Oculus Connect in venues this year, which has been really successful. It's been awesome to see VR enthusiasts who have headsets but couldn't make it to San Jose get together and get to know each other in venues and watch the exciting keynotes and the esports events and things like that, which has been awesome. And we did a few cool things, which we launched a new version of venues for the event and added a few cool new features. One of which is if you attend OC5 in venues, then you can pick one of a few special edition T-shirts for your avatar, which is the beginning of some cool stuff we're doing with avatars around kind of making that more of a personal experience. And you can wear this at the event or anywhere else that you use your Oculus avatar in the future, which is pretty cool. And we announced yesterday at the keynote that we are launching a bunch of new NBA events, which we're really excited about. Sports has been really popular in venues, so we're using that same tech to bring jerseys to people's avatars. So when you come into an NBA event, when we launch those soon, you will be able to choose your favorite team's jersey and wear that again throughout VR for the NBA season. So that's about it. We're really excited about where venues is headed, and the early promise we've seen is really promising. There's a lot of good stuff coming up, so keep an eye out for lots more. As we continue to develop and learn, I will try to come back and share more with you about the things we learn and bring you along for the ride. So yeah, thanks a lot. And next up, I'll hand it off to Cody, who has lots to tell you about the larger ecosystem of media and VR. All right, man.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Hey, we have a mic. I hear that's step 0 from the keynote yesterday. So let's talk media. As we've seen, it's a very important use case for VR. And as Mike took us through Oculus Venues, one of the decisions that was made was using 180 video so that you could be right in the midst of the action. And I'm imagining that the majority of you are not building a co-watching app, but the apps and experiences you are building probably do rely on media. And what I want to do is take us on a 30,000-foot view and think about how the choices we have in the media types we select allow us to fulfill different use cases and fulfill different social needs. Because if you are building a social experience, if you're building a social app, If you're not designing the media experience, then your users are figuring out ways to do it themselves. So let's get started. First off, who am I? I am Cody Sumter. I am also a product manager in the social VR team, the third to talk right now. And this is some of my team. A lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about is because of their hard work, and so I am just fortunate enough to be able to stand up here and talk about it. So we're going to do three things. First, we're going to dive into some data about how people are using VR media today. Second, we'll look into some insights into the use cases of how they're using it. And finally, we'll take a slightly higher view of options we have today and going forward with VR media. However, if we rewind 3 years, it's OC3, and I were to ask anyone in this room, what does VR media mean? They probably would have said 360. It really was the only accessible game in town at the time. And so 2015, we released 360 videos on Facebook. And the next year, 360 photos. And last year, we introduced Live 360, the ability to capture 360 photos within the Facebook app, and ways to consume it in VR, such as Facebook 360 and Spaces. This is really a test to see how many times I can say 360 back-to-back. Finally, this year, we've continued rolling out support for 360, but also things like 3D objects, 180, 3D photos, and other forms of VR media. And the through line through all of this is in the future, you should think of VR media the same way you think of a JPEG or a video or text. You should just expect it to work wherever you are. And because we've been working with 360s now for the last several years, we have enough data that we can start asking some fundamental questions about how people are using them. And so a first question you might ask is, when are people taking them? When are people taking 360 photos, 360 videos? And the data shows that 360s are incredibly seasonal, specifically in the winter and summer holidays, spiking around New Year's. And maybe this shouldn't be all that surprising that the photos we take tend to spike when we're traveling, when we're on vacation, and when we're back home in the day-to-day, slightly less often. So then maybe a more interesting question is, what are the subjects of those photos? What are people taking 360 photos and videos of? And when we dive into that, we see that they're primarily of scenic vistas. So you have mountain ranges, and you have beaches, and you have forests, but you also have city skylines and ballparks in New York Times Square. Basically, environments, places that you want the eye to wander, that you want the viewer to explore a scene, places where a postcard just wouldn't do it justice. And 360s have found a very solid niche here. But then that might lead to the question of, what are people not capturing? What are we not seeing in 360s that we might expect? And when we dive into this, we see not a lot of people and pets. And this is kind of striking, because if you think about it, what do you post? Like, what are the photos that you capture? What are the photos that you tend to share? Typically, they're your friends, your family, your loved ones, and your pets. And so this is a very striking thing to see, that we're not seeing as much of this. And there's some possible reasons for this. First, face stitching has historically been kind of awful. For those of us who have been in this space for a while, you probably have photo albums full of hilarious auto-awfuls. Second, it can be socially awkward sometimes, especially when people you're with don't know what a 360 camera is, and you're holding it up, and they're like, what is that? You've taken away from the moment briefly. No, this will pass over time, but there's also for phone capture, where if I have to have everyone stand still for 10 seconds while I slowly pan around the room. But even with both of those two things, I think there's something else going on here. And that thing is, when we do take photos of our friends, our loved ones, our family, our pets, our food, we tend to care about framing. We tend to care that there's a focus of the shot, there was a thing we were trying to capture, and oftentimes, because 360s are so good at capturing the environment, we lose that. So this is a photo that my friend Brian took, and I would challenge you to answer the question, what is the focus of this shot? Is it him? Is it the city? Is it the tower? I'd argue it's really hard to tell. And if we zoom back out from VR for a second and talk about just photography or videography generally, if you've bought a camera, you know how many lenses there are, how many options you have, and each one has its pros and it has its cons. And so for me personally, I have a 50mm lens that I use for portraits, and I have a fast 18mm lens that I use for landscapes, and I have a 600mm telescope that I use for the eclipse and nebula and galaxies. And you could ask me to use that telescope to take a portrait, and I probably could, and it would probably be pretty interesting, but I can guarantee that it would be significantly harder, and the result probably wouldn't be as good. And in VR, we're kind of in the same state with 360, that we have our first camera and we have the kit lens that comes with it, and we have been using it for absolutely everything. And we found some really clever ways to use it in situations it was never designed for. But we're finally getting to the point that we have options. It's not just 360. And so what I want to talk about is a handful of those options, those VR media lenses that we have. And these are just categories that are still evolving. But the first one is environmental. And so environmental is kind of what we've been talking about. It's being able to capture a space, capture an environment, allow the eye to wander, the user to explore. And these can be amazing in social situations. If you think about it, they can provide the backdrop or the activity itself. And so we've been talking about 360s, but we can take those a step further and instead talk about 3D 360s, or in this case, 3D panoramas. This is work out of the computational photography team up in Seattle, and using a depth sensing phone, taking a series of images and combining them together into a single scene. The problem that you can have with this is once you are in a 3D environment like this and you're trying to be social, have other avatars in the space, you can have binocular disparity between the avatars and the environment, and that's something you really have to look out for. So it can be a challenge. However, you can go one step further and say, is the ultimate goal like reconstruction? And so this is a project to use a series of photos or videos to reconstruct the space itself as a point cloud. The goal not being for fidelity, but being able to use fewer points of data to reconstruct the feeling of a space. And this is best when you know the environment yourself, because your brain is able to fill in the gaps, and you don't care what time it is on the clock, you just care the feeling of the space itself. But when fidelity does matter, you have things like this. This is out of the Core Tech group. You may have seen some of this yesterday in the keynote of doing very accurate reconstruction and capture using normal hardware. But all of these are basically the same in the sense of they are trying to capture the environment and allow you to explore it. But if you know what you're focusing on, if you know what you're trying to draw the person's eye to, your viewer's eye to, then we have to start looking at more focused formats. And this is a fairly nascent area, but we have a couple examples of what this looks like beyond just rectilinear photos and rectilinear videos. So from a consumer standpoint, we have something like a 3D photo that can be taken just with a phone with a depth sensor. And when you see it in the feed like this, it's kind of magical as you're scrolling to feel like you're looking into a portal. But when you put the headset on, it truly goes up another level as it feels like you're looking through a window. And if you care about video and if you want the audience and know that the audience is looking you in the eye and that they're looking back, then you have something like 180, which is fantastic for interviews, is fantastic for cooking shows, anything like that where you want to ensure that there is focus. And finally, we have VR native media formats. And this is maybe one of the ones I am most excited about, because from a creation standpoint, we're able to close the loop from the medium in which you're creating to the medium in which it's being consumed. And so if you are a 3D illustrator, there is nothing better than something like Quill, which allows you to create right there in the same medium. Whether it is a static or an illustration or has motion or is just actually a short film itself. And because it's made in VR, you understand how it's going to be consumed. You understand how people are going to see it either as an environment around you or something small in front of you, a story being told. And because it's also native in VR, it's very easy to drop multiple people in to explore it together. And so if Quill was for illustrators, then you might consider Medium for sculptors. And we've already started to see art openings in VR, in Oculus Home, with people coming together around their creations. It's really magical. And finally, we have apps like Spaces, but this goes beyond Spaces. This is basically any social VR app. And we see a couple different things. One is, as soon as you allow people to come together in VR, they start creating content. Whether or not that's a comedy show, a podcast, an interview, whatever. They'll live stream, they'll record. So whether it's Facebook or Twitch or YouTube, like content is already going out. And you no longer have to have a broadcast studio. You don't have to buy tickets across the country. You don't need a wardrobe department. All you need is a couple people, an idea, and you can go crazy. But I think there's something even more important here, which is if VR is successful, people are going to start having many of their important moments in their lives happen in VR, And that means that people are going to want to capture those moments in VR, both for remembering for themselves, for sharing with their friends, for in VR consumption and out of VR consumption. And if you're not building this into your app, then users are figuring out a way to do it themselves. So immediately the first thing that tends to happen is we're going to start taking screenshots. There'll be screenshots everywhere. But we'll figure out ways, like the amount of work necessary to do live streaming could often be quite hard. But people are still figuring out ways to do it because these moments matter and they're worth capturing. And so the question I want to leave you with is just, what is your goal? We're very much at a point where this space is very nascent. Your options are starting to grow, but are still a lot to be explored. And so we, as a community, are going to have to explore, for a particular goal, what is the best medium, what is the best VR media type, and how do you want to use that? And so with that, I'd like to thank you guys so much and look forward to going on this journey with you. Have a good day.